You know, back when I was still pretending to go to high school, I used to know these three lads that were always out and about in town. They were like the alpha chads of their day, man. They wore all the best clothes, drank like men twice their age, and they could get into any nightclub and pull any girls they wanted. Everyone knew them, everyone respected them, and nobody wanted to mess with them. Then their main man, let's call him Craig. Oh wait, that was his actual name. Craig got into a spot of bother one night and found himself arrested for public intoxication. Well, and assault on a police officer, stealing a police vehicle, wounding with intent and attempted murder. Anyway, Craig was sent away for 18 months to think about what he did, but then something weird happened. Without him around to back them up, the other two were kind of lost. They didn't look so confident anymore. They couldn't get into the clubs they used to go to, and the girls didn't want to know them. It turns out that Craig was basically the linchpin holding them together, and once he was out of the picture, everyone began to realise that the other two were just mediocre hangers-on, cruising around on his reputation. Which brings me neatly along to The Dark Knight Rises, the third best movie in the Dark Knight trilogy, and yet another title in the growing list of Christopher Nolan films that are nowhere near as good as you remember them. And because it's my job to be a miserable asshole and spoil everyone's fun, let's take the rose-tinted nostalgia goggles off for the next 15 minutes or so and replace them with something more effective, like beer goggles. The movie begins with a CIA dark flight that's extracting a nuclear scientist and some prisoners from Uzbekistan, led by fucking Littlefinger of all people. He wants information on a terrorist leader named Bane, but the prisoners aren't up for talking. Bane is though, and he's like, "Ha! I planned this whole thing so I could get my hands on Scientist Man." Wow, lucky the CIA happened to put their high-value asset on the same flight as the extremely dangerous men that are hunting for him, because if they decided to use two separate flights, none of this would even be happening. But then an even bigger plane flies in above them, which apparently nobody on board notices, including the fucking pilots. Because I guess flight transponders, radar systems, satellite tracking, and fucking eyeballs aren't a thing in this universe. Then a bunch of guys fast rope down to the CIA plane and blow the shit out of Bane's captors, and they're able to do this without getting turned into mince by the propellers, or the pilots attempting any kind of evasive maneuvers, because that would definitely make an assault like this impossible. Fucking genius writing, man. Then they hook the small plane up to the big plane and drag it through the air like a fucking anchor, and the wings and tail just kind of fall off. Because I guess planes aren't designed to cope with things like wind resistance.
Of course.
Then Bane captures Science Man, and they do a blood transfusion from him to a dead body to make it look like he was killed in the crash, before cutting the plane loose and escaping. What the fuck? Let's go over Bane's genius plan one more time, shall we? So he wants to get his hands on Science Man so he can use his expertise to turn a nuclear reactor into a bomb. Don't worry, we'll cover that later. But Science Man refuses his offer and surrenders to the CIA instead. So Bane allows himself to be captured and just so happens to end up on the same exact extradition flight as Science Man. Wow, that was lucky. Then he stages an elaborate airborne heist, overcoming multiple armed men, propellers, physics, and common sense. He brings the dead body along and transfers Science Man's blood into it and leaves one of his own followers in the wreckage to make it look like he and Science Man were killed in the crash.
Of course.
I mean, there's so many things that could have gone wrong at literally every stage of this plan that I genuinely don't understand how it was even supposed to succeed. What if the CIA had decided to interrogate Bane right there in Uzbekistan? What if Littlefinger had just said, fuck it, and executed Bane right there and then? What if the pilots of the CIA plane had seen that enormous cargo aircraft approaching and taken evasive action to avoid it? What if they put in a mayday call to report what was happening? What if Bane or Science Man had been killed in the crossfire during the extraction attempt? How exactly does running a blood transfusion for a few seconds alter a person's DNA profile? Why the fuck couldn't they have brought two dead bodies so that Bane didn't have to leave one of his own men behind? Wouldn't it look kind of suspicious that the wings and fuselage of the CIA plane impacted several miles away from each other? Wouldn't that be like a very obvious clue that something extremely dodgy had gone on with that flight?
Of course.
Now don't get me wrong, it's a very visually impressive set piece, and it seems like the external shots were done with actual stuntmen instead of CGI, but when you look past the pretty pictures and actually apply your thinking meat to what's happening, well, it all starts to fall apart pretty quickly, and this is just the first 5 minutes. Anyway, flash over to Gotham City and all is not well with Bruce Wayne. It's been 8 years since the events of The Dark Knight, and Batman's been forced into retirement after taking the blame for Harvey Dent's death. Now Bruce is just a crazy old recluse, hobbling around his mansion on a cane. Wayne Enterprises is also on the ropes after Bruce pulled the plug on a fusion reactor project because he realised it could be turned into a weapon in the wrong hands. You probably should have realised that before you sank billions of dollars into it.
Of course.
But man, I sure hope he made sure to dismantle the reactor and destroy all the research instead of just leaving it sitting around so it can be easily reactivated.
5 minutes later.
This is now a 4-megaton nuclear bomb.
Oh, never mind. Things only get worse for him when Anne Hathaway sneaks into his house and steals his fingerprints, and Bane uses them at the Gotham Stock Exchange to bankrupt his company. Because, you know, illegal stock purchases made during a terrorist incident would absolutely be considered legit, and definitely wouldn't get reversed the moment the dust settles. Bruce is out for payback, so it's time to suit up and kick Bane's ass. The only problem is that he's old and weak now and his knees are fucked. Alfred doesn't think he can win, so instead of helping him, he has a good cry and then quits. Jesus, really? After everything you guys have been through together, you're gonna bitch out on him when he needs you the most? Ah, it doesn't matter anyway. Bruce has got a new bitch in his life now. This is Miranda Tate, the CEO of Wayne Enterprises. She's beautiful and smart and super supportive of Bruce, and before you know it, they're bumping uglies together. Well, I sure hope that this obviously too good to be true character doesn't wind up being too good to be true and betrays Bruce in the finale. So Bruce makes a deal with Anne Hathaway to take him to Bane, and the two of them have a nice good dust-off. But Bruce is overconfident and unprepared, while Bane is in full-on beast mode, so he kicks Bruce's ass and breaks his back. Then he flies him to the other side of the world and puts him in a prison based around a giant hole in the ground, so that he can watch Bane destroy Gotham City. Wait, what? Why has Bane suddenly turned into Dr. Evil? If you really want to watch Bruce suffer, why not just throw him in a prison cell and keep him under armed guard? That way you can watch him anytime you want. Why waste precious time travelling halfway around the world and put him in a place that you know people have escaped from before? Aren't you basically guaranteeing that he's gonna recover, escape, and come after you eventually?
Of course.
Also, what the fuck is the deal with this prison? I mean, it seems to have TV reception, electricity, food, and water supplies, but there's no guards there to maintain order. Like, who provides all this stuff, and why? I mean, this guy looks pretty well fed. And yeah, I get that it's underground and clearly difficult to escape from, but you've basically provided the prisoners with all the resources and raw materials that they would need to construct a means of escaping, and there's nobody around to stop them. If they were actually to work together instead of fighting each other, they'd be out of there within a matter of days. Anyway, whatever. Bruce is out of action for now, so Bane flies all the way back to Gotham City to put his diabolical plan into action. First he lures the police down into the sewers, and by police, I mean literally every cop with a badge in the entire city. There's no such thing as backup or strategic reserves where Gotham's concerned, because it's not like the rest of the city needs to be protected or anything. Nope, they just head down there without stopping to question whether this could be a very obvious trap, and... Oh, never mind. With the dumb as fuck police out of the way, Bane takes over the city and blows up all the bridges, sealing off Gotham from the rest of the country. Then he's like, "You're free now, citizens, have fun." And he uses Science Man to reactivate the fusion reactor and turn it into an extremely slow time bomb that'll go off in about 6 months. What the fuck? What on earth is Bane's plan supposed to be here? This is like the aircraft hijacking at the start, only 10 times bigger and more stupid. It relies on literally everyone in Gotham being the dumbest, most clueless and ineffective version of themselves possible. Like, what if the police find a way to escape from the sewers? What if the fusion reactor had been properly dismantled and Science Man couldn't reactivate it? What if the citizens of Gotham band together and overthrow him? What if the US government decides to intervene, which they almost certainly would? I mean, it's not like you can just take over a major city with millions of people in it and expect them to just stand by and do nothing. Oh wait, maybe you can. What if Batman escapes from the prison and comes back to kick Bane's ass? There's literally dozens of ways this whole thing could easily fall apart, and the question I keep asking myself is, Why put yourself in this position at all? If all Bane wants to do is destroy Gotham, he already has the means to do so easily. What's this ticking clock bullshit all about? And why is he sticking around to watch it happen? What the hell is he doing all this time? Does he want to die? If so, why not just trigger the bomb right away? If he wants to prove some kind of point and spark a revolution against the upper classes, why resort to show trials and public executions? Isn't that going to have the opposite effect and unite the entire population against him? The Joker from The Dark Knight already made a similar point much more effectively about the selfish, destructive nature of human society. He was out to prove that if you push people far enough, they'll do just about anything to stay alive, and he very nearly succeeded. Bane's plan just feels like a slower, dumber, more watered down rehash of the exact same concept, and it comes across as tired and played out. Anyway, I guess it's time to catch up with Bruce. So a doctor in the prison punches his back together again, because I guess that's how complex spinal surgery works. And he explains to Bruce that only one person has ever escaped from this prison. I guess it must have been Bane, eh?
Of course.
So Bruce works out for a few months and gets swole as fuck again, and then escapes the prison by, jumping slightly further than he did before. By George, it's genius! Then he flies back to Gotham and sets a bridge on fire, because that's clearly a valuable use of his time, and then he frees the police from the sewers, because apparently they're still alive and being given supplies by Bane's men. Why? Don't know. Also, I guess they must have a laundry and shower blocks down there in the sewers, because their clothes are still clean and their hair and beards haven't grown a bit. Excellent writing there, Chris. Anyway, Batman frees the police and there's a big street battle and both sides charge towards each other like medieval infantry, despite the fact that Bane's men have armoured cars and automatic weapons. Yeah, sure, good luck with that strategy. And this time, Bruce kicks Bane's ass because he discovers the ingenious secret of punching him in the face really hard. But then, wouldn't you know it, Miranda shows up and betrays Bruce. See, I bet you thought it was Bane who escaped the prison as a kid.
Of course.
Well, that just shows you how sexist you are. It turns out the little girls can escape from poorly guarded, completely illogical prisons too, despite being smaller and weaker and almost certainly not able to jump as far. But who cares about details, gravity, physics, logical consistency, or good old-fashioned common sense? Christopher Nolan certainly doesn't. So Miranda gives Bruce a nice good seeing to with her knife, and then fucks off to detonate the bomb. But then Anne Hathaway shows up and kills Bane, and then they track Miranda down and kill her. But oh no, there's no way to deactivate the bomb in time. So Bruce uses the Batwing to fly it out to sea, and then it blows up and everyone's happy. Then Alfred has another good cry and goes on vacation and runs into Bruce in a restaurant somewhere. How exactly did Bruce survive severe internal injuries, massive blood loss, and being dumped in the sea miles offshore in close proximity to a thermonuclear blast? Don't know. Oh yeah, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's in this movie, and it ends with him being given the keys to the Batcave because it turns out that he's Robin. Fuck off, film. The Dark Knight Rises basically epitomizes everything wrong with Christopher Nolan movies. It's long and convoluted and self-indulgent, trying to cram too many characters and ideas in without really knowing what to do with them, and trying so hard to be smart and complex that it ends up tripping over its own feet. The antagonist's plan is absolutely laughable, his objectives are questionable at best, and his motivations are completely nonsensical.
Of course.
Also, I have to talk about the tone of this film. The Dark Knight movies all tended towards grounded realism rather than stylized comic book adaptations, but I can't help feeling that they lose a lot of the charm and atmosphere along the way, and no movie suffers more from this than The Dark Knight Rises itself. Gotham City used to be a character all by itself, a dingy, dark, crime-ridden hellhole that people only lived in because they couldn't afford anywhere better. It was all smoky back alleys, seedy gambling dens, and crumbling Gothic cathedrals. Now it's basically just New York by a different name, and all those skyscrapers and clean streets just feel bland and dull. This isn't a place I want to learn about or see more of, because I've already seen it a million times before. Christopher Nolan movies tend to attract the best and brightest amongst the acting community, and this one's no exception. Christian Bale is serious and focused as always, even though he doesn't seem quite as enthusiastic as he used to. Gary Oldman and Michael Caine are seasoned professionals that have been doing this stuff forever and know exactly what they're about. Tom Hardy, despite the shitty writing, manages to make Bane into a cunning, menacing and unpredictable antagonist. You really feel like this guy could do anything at any moment, and he would do it without hesitation. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is pretty forgettable, and I'm really glad that they didn't try to make some crappy Robin spin-off. And as for Anne Hathaway, well, she's no Michelle Pfeiffer, that's for sure. She doesn't really have the sex appeal or the fighting ability to play Catwoman, and overall, she just feels pretty generic in the role. Ultimately, The Dark Knight Rises feels like a film that was made because it needed to be done, rather than because there was a great story waiting to be told. The trilogy had to be closed off in a satisfying way that would free up the actors and the director to move on to new projects, and by all accounts, Nolan wasn't enthusiastic about doing it, and well, I kinda wish he hadn't, because he really wasn't the right man for the job in the first place. Christopher Nolan movies tend to focus more on high-minded intellectual concepts, rather than setting up compelling narratives and emotionally engaging characters. He's all about pushing the boundaries of science and physics and reality, and while that's great for movies that permit him total creative freedom, clearly it wasn't gonna work here. This film is a prime example of a man being reluctantly forced not to play to his strengths. As a result, it feels kind of half-assed and bland, like his heart wasn't really in it. And while it certainly delivers on the big set pieces and climactic action, there's no escaping the fact that the story tying it all together is too long, too convoluted, and too contrived to be interesting. Honestly, when I think about the Dark Knight trilogy as a whole, and the crazy amount of praise that's been heaped on it, it really does remind me of Craig and his mates from my charming anecdote at the start. Two mediocre hangers-on, resting on the reputation of one really solid movie that elevates the others to a status they don't particularly deserve. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.